So I saw this post on Threads, and I've always wondered why they haven't made this historic event into a movie. The Indians at Alcatraz was a historic event that really has everything from romance to adventure, even a fire that took over. It's crazy. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, also known as The Rock, sits on an island in the freezing cold water of the San Francisco Bay. So, of course, this was all Native American land at one point, and it's said that the Native Americans used this island as a place to banish people because it was so isolated and in the middle of these cold, choppy waters. So, in a way, it was kind of like a prison before there was a prison there. And then in the 1850s, it was overrun and turned into a fort or a base as, Americans expanded westward. And then in 1910, the official U.S. military army prison was put on this land. So it was a military prison built on the island. And then in 1934, the security was increased and the prison transitioned into a high security prison that operated for 29 years and eventually closed because of its high operational costs because they were having to bring supplies, people, everything out by boat. So that is pretty costly. The prison itself and the people who went to this prison because of its exclusivity inspired lots of media, from movies to TV shows to books. I mean, you name it. And there's no movie about the Indians at Alcatraz. So in 1963, when they closed the prison, the U.S. declares it as surplus federal land. And Native activists saw this as an opportunity to bring attention to the broken treaties and demand that Alcatraz Island gets turned into an indigenous cultural center. One of the main characters of this movie would be Richard Oakes. He's fine as hell. I'm sorry. I mean, he looks like an indigenous Marlon Brando. Like, he's so fine. So Richard Oakes is kind of the face of this movement to go occupy Alcatraz, and he's bringing people over to the island so they can be there for Thanksgiving to celebrate Thanksgiving on Alcatraz. They end up spending, I think, 19 months on the island, and they've turned this prison into like a homestead. They're growing food, they're getting people to bring them food, they're bringing supplies out, and people are living in Alcatraz, but they've like made it a home. It's so wild because Alcatraz notoriously was not comfortable. It's haunted as hell. And all of the cells are so small. But they found ways to take over like the warden's house and stuff like that. And they made it like this homestead for like a year and a half. So Richard Oakes is having like press conferences where people are coming out by boat to listen to him speak, from Native American elders to Jane Fonda, Marlon Brando, and all kinds of press outlets to hear him talk about how historically Native people have been ripped off and how they deserve land. It's a land back movement. And Richard's like, we will happily buy the land back. He says, we will purchase the island for $24 in glass beads and red cloth, a precedent set by the white man. Our offer is greater than the 47 cents per acre offer that white men are paying Californian Indians for their land, end quote. And it's definitely worth mentioning that I believe there was 17 Native Americans who were sent to Alcatraz, which was one of the worst prisons of all time historically. And their crime was being Native American. There was a movement happening at Alcatraz, and this was called the Red Power Movement. And there were a lot of things happening out at Alcatraz during this occupation. And of course, the government did not like this occupation, and it ended by the government setting the warden's house where people were living on fire. And there were tragedies that happened out at this island, like Richard Oakes' daughter fell off a cliff and sadly passed away. And there were other things that happened, but the burning of the warden's house was the government saying, we will no longer stand for this. We're not going to give you this land. We're not going to sell you this land. This is reclaimed in the name of America. So after the occupation ends on Alcatraz Island, the government reclaims the island and turns it into a national park, where now they have a museum. And when you come up to the island on like the ferry, you can see this outside of Alcatraz as you're coming up to it. But even though they give these nods to the occupation of the Native American people, Alcatraz, that brings in millions upon millions of dollars a year with this museum, doesn't donate any of it to the Native people locally. Like, they have stolen this land, turned it into a prison, turned it into whatever. They still haven't given anything back to Native people, but they let them keep this little sign up. So, and they tell a little bit about the history. And apparently sometimes I think they allow like ceremonies out on Alcatraz Island, but it's literally the very minimum. Even though this occupation ended with a fire, and of course, there were personal tragedies that Richard had to live through during the occupation, he still thought of it as a win. And he went out to celebrate the occupation with some friends. And during this celebration at a bar, he was attacked with a pool cue. And it left him where he had to relearn how to speak and how to walk. And obviously, he became a target because he was the face of this revolution. And it was actually going somewhere. So after his family experienced these tragedies of losing their daughter and him having to relearn how to walk and talk, they moved back to Sonoma to be closer to family. And after a couple of months of living in Sonoma, he's tragically shot. And it's by this guy. I mean, there's a whole conspiracy about it now because this guy was weird. He was newly at this position watching this YMCA campground, and the campground previously had agreements with the local native people that they could hunt on that land, but then the cops gave him kind of permission. Like there's a whole story that's still kind of unfolding with that, but it sounds like a conspiracy to take out this local indigenous activist. It's really strange. And I can't believe they haven't made a movie about this, you know?